I've been making homemade sauerkraut as part of my simple whole foods approach to eating well on a fixed income. And I've noticed a real difference in the way I feel. There's less bloating, better digestion. I think I even feel more satisfied when I eat. Today I'm going to show you exactly how I make it, step by step. No special tools, just real food done simply. Welcome to Growing Again. I'm Cindy. You don't need any fancy equipment for this. It's not a complicated process. All you're going to need is a head of green cabbage, some good quality salt, and a clean jar. And with a little bit of patience, you will soon have a jar of living, gut-healing sauerkraut that costs pennies to make. Since I am really well stocked at the moment on my regular cabbage, I'm using a napa cabbage today. But for starting with, I would use just a regular head of green cabbage. I usually cut mine in half, wash it really well, and then you want to take off a couple of these outer layers of leaves and set them aside and save them. We'll be using those a little bit later. I'll show you what for. And then start cutting it up. Nice thin pieces. I hope this won't be too confusing, but I've actually got clips from two different fermentation sessions. This one is using just a regular head of green cabbage. The other clips are the napa. In fact, notice that jar of cabbage on the table next to me in the other clips. That's the one that I'm actually making right now in these clips. Once it's shredded, I just drop it right here into my big metal mixing bowl. That's where we'll add the salt. And again, I'm going to pull off a couple of these outer leaves. Start thinly slicing your cabbage. In this clip, I'm a little bit ahead of where I am with the napa cabbage. I have this head of cabbage completely shredded, and I just added the salt. Now you want to just dig right in with nice clean hands and work that shredded cabbage to incorporate the salt throughout. This will start the process of making the brine. Fermenting foods has been around for thousands of years. All countries and all cultures have a history of fermenting foods. When this is done right, it's a safe way to store the abundance of food that we might get during a growing season, and making it last well into a winter season when it could possibly be a little more difficult to get fresh vegetables. At least that's the way it used to be. In our modern world, we usually have an abundance of fresh produce available year-round. Once this is all nicely shredded, it's time to add our salt. This napa cabbage that I got weighed just under 2 pounds. So according to how much salt it needs, it's about a tablespoon and a half. There's my half. I'm just going to shake it over the top of it. Looks like this is right at that right amount. So I'm going to just dump it all in. And once you have it all in, dig your hands right in and start massaging that cabbage. You want to massage the salt right down into the cabbage. The salt will help the natural moisture in the cabbage to be released. And then that becomes your brine. Then just dig your hands right in and squeeze it for just a couple of minutes. Then I'm going to leave it, let it just sit here while the salt does its thing. And soon you will be able to see a lot of fluids begin to build up in the bottom of this pan as the salt works on that cabbage. So one of the first questions you may have is, how much salt do I add? Since we're keeping this really simple, generally speaking, you would add 1.5 to 2 tablespoons of salt per medium-sized head of cabbage. And your next question is probably, what's a medium-sized head of cabbage? So that is a cabbage that weighs between 3.5 and 4 pounds. For every 3.5 to 4 pounds of cabbage, you would add 1.5 to 2 tablespoons of salt. There's some give and take here. Some of this is based on personal preference. But if you'll keep it within those ranges, you won't have any problems. And what if you don't have a scale? How do you know what the cabbage weighs? Hang on to your receipt. Often the weight of the cabbage will be listed on the receipt. And if not on the receipt, then use the scale that's in the produce department at your grocery store and weigh it at the store. That will let you know how big your cabbage is for sure. Also, I don't think I mentioned, you can use just a regular knife to shred your cabbage, or you can run it through a mandolin or a food processor. It works either way. I just prefer doing it by hand and using my knife. So let's dig in here again and see what's happening with our lettuce. I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but there is already, look at how much is dripping off of that. It's already doing a really good job of making its own brine. I traded jars too. I started out with a half-gallon size jar, 2 quarts. But I think all of this is going to fit nicely into a 1-quart jar. Can you see that? See if I can tip the bowl up and show you even. And it does the same thing even if you're using a regular head of green cabbage instead of napa. Can you see that fluid? Here we are back to our regular head of cabbage. Can you hear the moisture in that? And look at the moisture in that. That is just what we need. Just what we want. In our day, fermenting has become known for the health benefits that it carries. Ferments are alive and thriving with beneficial microbes that create a healthy balance for our gut biome. And that brine is exactly what we need. Your sauerkraut will be absolutely delicious with nothing but the cabbage. But you can add things, and I'm going to add just maybe a teaspoonful of whole peppercorns in this one. And in the regular cabbage, I like to add shredded carrots and sliced jalapenos. It gives it just the perfect little bit of a bite. Let's fill our jar. Just because this can kind of get messy sometimes, my jar is nice and clean, so I'm going to sit it actually right here in the bottom of the bowl, and then I'll be able to fill it up a little bit easier and keep the mess kind of contained. I'm going to put just a couple of little handfuls in, and then I'm going to start using my fist and pressing that down into the bottom of the jar. You want to just press it all down. You can hear the salt on the bottom of the pan. I don't know if you can see the fluids or not, but let's go ahead and keep filling and keep pressing it down. Just use your fist and press it down. I hope you can see that. I'm never sure of where the camera is actually pointed. And there have been a few surprises when I get to the editing stage. The napa cabbage doesn't make near as much as a regular head of green cabbage does. Normally, with just one head of cabbage, this jar would be mostly full. In fact, well, you can see from this one, that's one head of cabbage in a half-gallon size jar. So I'm gonna move this out so that you can see it a little bit better. Can you see that fluid as I'm pressing this down? You want it to be nice and snug, pressed into the bottom. As the cabbage ferments, little bits and pieces will actually start to break away and float some. And you want everything to stay underneath that brine. So pack it down and then pack it down again. Okay. And the rest of this fluid that's here, I'm going to pour that right in the jar. And then press it down again. See if I can get all of those little floating pieces to be down underneath the brine. Now this is where we use those pieces that we saved. Here I have jumped back to our regular head of cabbage and filling that jar, which is done the very same way, although I will fill this one a little bit more than half full and then start pressing it down with that wooden mallet, a Kraut Pounder that's next to me. It does make it a little bit easier. You will notice how much it presses that down so much quicker than when doing it with your fist. You can use these leaves to help hold it down. So I'm going to break this one a little bit and then help it get it to kind of go right down along the side, and it will help to hold some of those pieces that might float down underneath the brine. Use this other piece and just keep pressing it down on the top as we go around. These leaves will help to keep all of those little bits and pieces underneath the brine. And that's what we want, everything to stay under the brine. It's probably good enough, but just to be sure, I can see a little piece there, so I'm going to move that out. Now, in addition to that, I want to see if I can find something to weight it down even more, because through the fermenting process, it's possible that things will continue to rise. I'm using cabbage leaves that we saved to go into the top of this fermentation as well. Works the very same way as we did with the napa cabbage. You want to press them down in to help hold all of those little bits and pieces underneath the brine. Keeping things under the brine creates the perfect environment for those beneficial microbes to thrive and to continue to multiply. That's a fermentation weight that I'm adding to the jar, It will help to press things down even further and allow the brine to stay nice and high above the cabbage. Going to press it down even a little bit more. Look at that brine. And I'm using a fermentation lid to seal this off. I'll tell you more about the weight and the lid in just a moment. Now, since I said we weren't going to use any fancy equipment, this is actually just a little pimento jar that I've saved. And I've put some water in it for added weight. And this will actually fit right down inside the jar. And I can press it a little bit to raise the level of that brine. I don't want it to actually go in the jar, and I don't want the water that's in the little pimento jar to get out into my brine. But that adds enough weight to where everything is completely submerged. Now, all we need is a lid. This lid is not completely airtight. As this ferments, it's going to put off some CO2. And you're going to see little bubbles come bubbling up as it ferments, which is all good. That's what you want to see. So it's nothing to worry about. It's just part of the process. That'll actually stop within a few days. But because those bubbles do tend to build up, there's the possibility that the brine could bubble up and come out. And so you usually want to put your fermenting vessel in something else so that if it does bubble up and come out, you've got it contained. You know, the mess is a little more contained. But another thing that you'll want to do if you're not using a regular fermenting lid, and again, since I said we were going to do this without equipment, just use one of these lids, whatever fits your jar, and burp it. What that means is about once a day you want to come release it, lift it slightly, and put it back on. And that will let those CO2 air bubbles that have been building up be released. And then you're not going to have to worry about an explosion, although you won't anyway. You won't anyway. It's a good idea to store your ferment. You can leave it just sitting right on a counter or in a cupboard is where I do. You don't want it to be in direct sunlight, and darkness is fine. So I usually keep mine in one of my cupboards right here in my kitchen, and I'll check it every few days. With this one, I'll do it more than every few days. On my other one, I'll be using equipment, but I'll be checking it every day and releasing the air or the gases that have built up, and then put that lid right back on, and then just leave it sitting down in my cupboard for the next 14 days, and then we'll see what it does. Another thing to be aware of is the temperature inside your home, because optimal fermenting temperatures are between 65 and 75. If it's closer to 65, then you'll have a slower ferment. If it's closer to 75 or even above, then it'll be a faster ferment. You can still ferment above 75, but sometimes it can get too fast. When they ferment too fast, that's when you can sometimes run into problems. So you have to keep an eye on it closer. So try to stay within that 65 to 75 range as far as the temperature in your home. You really don't need any special equipment to be able to ferment, especially with cabbage. It's one of the easiest. But I do have some items that I use for my fermenting, and because you will be seeing me use them in part of this video, I wanted to explain them to you a little bit. Probably one that is the most important are these fermentation weights. It's just a glass weight. It's got this little knob here on the top of it to help make it easier for picking it up and sitting it in. But it's nice and heavy. And generally, I'll use one of these weights inside of my ferments rather than that little pimento jar. And this thing is a digital pH meter. It will help you to read the pH of your ferment. You'll see me actually stick this down inside of the ferment, and it will give me a reading up here as to the pH level. That does make things a little bit easier, but it is still absolutely not necessary. This is a Kraut Pounder. Instead of using your fist, you can use this Kraut Pounder to press down the cabbage. And these little lids, these are called, it's just a little rubber lid, little nipple here on the top. It's called what is it called? A pickle, it's a pickle pipe. That's what it is, a pickle pipe. And it has, I hope you can see this, it has a little tiny hole right in the top of that. That allows for those CO2 bubbles that I was telling you about to come up and come through the nipple without allowing anything else to go back in. Makes it so that you don't have to burp it. And it just fits right inside of one of these canning rings, and you screw it down on the top of your jar. Nice and easy. Does make things a little bit easier, but again, it is not necessary. But because you do see me use them, and because I do like them, I'll include links for them in the description of the video. I just figured that since I mentioned pH with this little meter, I should probably try and explain that to you some. Any time a ferment is below 4, it's considered shelf stable. Meaning, technically, if it's below 4, you could literally just sit it on in your cupboard and it should do okay. But there is a little more to it than that. It kind of depends on the whole overall temperature, because for it to really last like it can, I mean, these ferments can easily last 6 months, even longer. I've never had one last that long because we ate it that too soon. But yeah, they can last. I've heard people talk about a ferment that they've been able to keep in their fridge for up to a year. So if you're keeping them properly and they're cooled properly, they do last a long time. So even though it's below 4, and even though it might be considered shelf stable, I think optimally you need to have it at a temperature at about 54. Unless you've got a root cellar or a basement or something where you're able to keep it, I keep mine in the fridge. But I do like to measure it just to have an idea of where the pH level is. It's absolutely not necessary. I think you'll see in the video even that some of my pH levels were in the low 300s. Anything less than 400 is considered very good and shelf stable, but I still keep mine in the fridge. This is the Napa cabbage. It's going to be, like I said, about another 2 weeks before I will open this up again, other than to just burp it. But it'll be another 2 weeks before I consider it ready. And I'll bring you back and open it with you so that you see it. I'm kind of thinking of starting a little mini fermentation series. There have been so many of you who've asked about how to do the fermented carrots and the peppers, other things that I ferment. I think I might do more than one video on this. So in one of those others, I'll open this up and we'll check it out and see how it's done in about the next 14 days. Anyway, I think that's everything. I do have some notes over there. I'll go look at them and see. But I think we covered everything. If not, I'll be back. Otherwise, thank you for being here with me today. I'll see you next time.